Requiem Metal Podcast, episode 141, brought to you by executive producer Andrew Joyce. Thank you very much for your support. We just heard Flight 19 from the Sweet Danger 7-inch by Angel Witch. This is the Rock Metal Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason.
And we're going back to the new wave of British heavy metal, one of the kind of penultimate bands that never really received the credit back in the day for many reasons. But we haven't really touched on this era too much outside of
Paul
some
Di'Anno,
old Maiden.
Maiden, and then Witchfinder General is really all we've really touched on from the new wave of British heavy metal. So...
Well, Priest. But Priest kind of predates
That's
the whole
true.
thing.
Yeah, Priest is kind of they're an influence on Angel Witch for sure, and especially some of the the Wishbone Ash type twin lead kind of
lead with
it's
one
not really
guitar
twin
player.
lead, but it's layered guitar. And these guys have really sort of come upon a renaissance. I'd say in probably the last 4 or 5, 6 years is when I kind of first started hearing about them. And I think I picked this up a couple of years ago and played it for you and Chris, and you and I especially really got into it. And then Chris kind of, I remember later, kind of was like, I'm kind of geeking on the Angel Witch now. And then it showed up in Decibel, about a year later or so. And then, there was a Decibel cover with, Dave Mustaine wearing an Angel Witch shirt, and, Lars from Metallica always name dropped them. And
you see like Gaz from Cathedral had the shirts on. It's basically been like one of those street cred shirts that you've seen on bands forever, but outside of the title track Angel Witch, I don't know if people have really heard the whole record.
I know, I'm sure, songs like White Witch probably have snuck out there, Sweet Danger was recorded 3 or 4 different times, so maybe
that was a single form for EMI, which hit the British charts for 1 week and then they got dropped.
They kind of had a rough history, which we'll get into in a second, but it's the Renaissance, whatever you want to say about them, and maybe you didn't hear it in Flight 19 there, but it's that song essentially is kind of, I guess, quintessential new wave of British heavy metal. It's not like the most dynamic thing that the Angel Witch is going to do, but that's why we played it first, kind of some older stuff. But there's a lot of really nice guitar layering, and especially the bass playing. That's one thing to point out with Angel Witch, and I think when you have a 3-piece, like a classic kind of
power trio,
you allow for the bass to do a lot more dynamic stuff, and it kind of weaves through
even
everything.
what Sabbath did with Geezer Butler, really kind of filling in the voids and not playing purely just backing rhythm either. And I think
Steve Harris did the same, but obviously Maiden's not a trio, a power trio, but
Kevin Riddle's the bass player, really kind of, I think him and Steve Harris were kind of two of the best bass players at the time
for that scene,
without a doubt. And these guys were contemporaries with Maiden. They played many shows together, and they got kind of the shit end of the stick, and EMI picked up Maiden and didn't pick up
and they had bad management in terms of trying to get recording contracts and stuff like that. Whereas Maiden had great,
with
people pushing.
With EMI, they originally started out their contract. They had an $80,000.
Oh yeah.
What the hell is it called?
Well, it was an $80,000 contract, but the stickler was the 6,000 pound advance or whatever, which they rejected.
Well, it eventually went down to $5,000, or 5,000 pounds or whatever it was, and they eventually just, we got to pay this all back anyways. They didn't care. I don't know. They're kind of young kids. They had bad management, and it didn't necessarily
Well, they kind of, from what I was trying to understand is, they kept negotiating things down, and they didn't feel like they need it in advance because they already had all their own instruments and stuff, which is usually what you want to use the advance for and stuff.
Well, for recording,
and so they said well, no, we don't need it, so give us something else, and it was sort of an all or nothing type of thing. And the main guy, the vocalist and guitar player,
Kevin
Hayborn, he kind of made a band decision without the other guys really having any input, and he just sort of said no, and there was really no counter offer offered, so they kind of were, they called their bluff basically, and they had nothing to fall back on, is what I kind of interpret it. But when you read that Hall of Fame interview, it's kind of hard to say, because all 3 guys, I doubt they hang out a lot and are good friends.
I don't think
from the vibe I get.
I believe Kevin Hayborn is the only original guy left in the band now. Bill Steer from Carcass is touring with them live as a another guitar player,
and they recently just put out a live record, actually, which, people that I read online said it sounded pretty good. It was from 2009, I guess. I mean, so it's relatively new from some festival or something.
But yeah, for all intents and purposes, I think just the self-titled record's kind of the one that's the best record. They've never really kind of beat it yet. So,
and what you get on typically if you find the reissues and stuff is you're going to get like Flight 19, which you just heard, and then you're going to get some of the stuff from the Metal for Mothers comp and the Sweet Danger EP, and then also the Loser single, which came out a year later, 1981, which there are 3 songs, 2 of which we're not playing, but then one we'll probably get a chance to play, the instrumental Dr. Thebes.
They were definitely the more, I think, poppy kind of vocal driven songs and
it could have been out of frustration that they didn't get signed doing this fairly heavy stuff. I mean, it was when we get to like a song like Angel of Death, for instance, I mean, it was a contemporary of what Venom was doing, really, in terms of like proto black metal type
better.
riffing, I mean, except skilled musicians. I just mean in terms of that like grim kind of dark,
well, and even going back to the kind of the black metal idea, they started in '77 as a band called Lucifer.
Yeah, and they had the Baphomet as the
it's kind of like their insignia logo, or whatever, their Eddie or whatnot. And the former drummer Steve Jones eventually, after they kind of split right before Angel Witch started, went and started Speed with Mr. Bruce Dickinson of Iron Maiden.
Wow!
So it's all if you've got that the Best of the Beast comp.
Is Angel Witch?
I'm sure Angel Witch is probably in there.
I remember that crazy thing staring
with
at it.
Urchin and everything else. Like
Napalm Death also did something similar for the Noise for Noise Sakes comp thing that they had, with all those crazy guys.
Which is always something that we were going to do for Requiem magazine back in the day, pre-internet, and we had a lot of it done up. I had it all hand drawn, but
do you still have that somewhere?
No, I have no idea where it is. But this was like the Swedish metal family.
Yeah, we were going to do.
And at the time, it was all going back and like looking at demos and CDs and saying, okay, Johnny Hellwood was on this, and then he was on this and this and this, and just making connections.
Now imagine what we could have done had we had that Swedish death metal book.
No,
to be able to pull that off.
Yeah, it'd be like a sofa-sized oil painting.
No doubt.
No, but
the funny part, going back to the symbol, the kind of Baphomet guy is, I mean, we almost owe Angel Witch like a thank you because we've kind of adopted that in a way with the iPod as kind of our
well, it's one of the
symbol,
one of the probably most like synonymous with death metal and heavy metal kind of like, at least later on more occult heavy metal stuff, like Sabbath never adopted the thing at all, but as far as like black metal goes. And
do you think that all come from Bathory? Or
I mean, Bathory technically never used Baphomet. They just used the go-ahead.
Yeah,
which
that's true.
And Venom used the go-ahead within the pentagram and stuff, but not necessarily the Baphomet, because the Baphomet's very specific. It's the female body with the the fingers up and all. I don't know exactly.
And then you have the dude in the middle of the Show No Mercy cover. So I mean,
which is the male version of Baphomet with some cool leather pants and the sword.
We should create a family tree for Baphomet and goat people.
There you go.
Kind of tie it all.
My arm will be in there.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, but the thing, going back in terms of like the influence, besides some of the visual and the lyrical content, I mean, they did have a lot of the songs that were more, I guess, occult driven and mystical and things like that. More so than what Maiden or a lot of the other new wave of British heavy metal bands like Def Leppard and Saxon and those bands were doing. The only other band that was really doing anything, I guess, occultish was Venom. And they were kind of like cartoony cultish, over the top.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess Maiden, at that time they didn't really have anything occultish. Really. It was just like,
no. Running Free, Phantom of the Opera, Prowler. I mean, it was sort of like
it was kind of all over the place.
Dark, it wasn't like happy music, but it wasn't as there was an Angel of Death and Baphomet and Hades Paradise and Sorcerers and stuff like that. Which have these, I don't know, they evoke kind of almost like a pre-merciful fate kind of thought process or something like that.
Yeah, and I guess they kind of went with, because the Kevin Hayborn kind of says that Sabbath is one of the major influences, which you really don't hear too much outside of the song Baphomet. You can hear some Sabbathy-ish kind of riffs.
You hear in White Witch, I guess, a little too.
A little, but it's down. Really, I mean, it's not like the Witchfinder General obvious, kind of.
It's more the atmosphere of doominess that atmosphere kind of is and there sometimes.
The whole cult nature of everything, and just trying to like a little bit of one-upsmanship, I think, on that. But
yeah, for sure. But, I mean, these guys, I think a lot of the new wave of British heavy metal bands, including Maiden to some extent, were drawing from, I guess some of the not only the punk rock energy that was just sort of like kind of, you know, fizzling out. There's a lot of energy, especially when we play the eponymous Angel Witch song, which is like, you know, punches you in the face kind of with energy. But, you know, you had Sabbath, obviously, being British, and Judas Priest, and the Wishbone Ashes. You know, Thin Lizzy, you got to throw in there. I hear a lot of Thin Lizzy, especially when we get into like Sorcerers and Gorgon and some of that stuff.
Thin Lizzy was not necessarily always, you know, they always had that kind of twin lead vibe, but don't always get credited that much for that stuff.
But then you listen to like songs like Emerald and stuff, you're like, damn, you know,
Emerald's pretty good.
Why weren't people listening to this?
Yeah, really. I think they just had more kind of mainstream appeal, especially with the, you know, more like sing along stuff and hits and everything. But,
and
they're definitely in the heavy metal pool, you know.
Yeah. But I also hear a lot of like glam rock stuff too, which I know like, you know, Joe Elliott and Def Leppard drew upon a lot of that. And
but I actually hear a lot of
Maiden did so much, did they? Like
they did with a lot of their B-sides. They did some like old, some like early UK glam ish kind of stuff. But I'm hearing a lot of, even not necessarily, when you do hear keyboards, you get a little bit of the Deep Purple, Blue Oyster Cult kind of vibe going on. But even just some of the guitar playing has it's almost adopting that the kind of keyboard stuff from the early hard rock stuff that at this point kind of fizzled off, that the whole new wave of British heavy metal was kind of a, you know, an antidote to, really. You know, like this stuff's just kind of getting ridiculous and long and not heavy and fast, and then this stuff just comes in and blows the doors off everything.
And I mean, I know like all British bands of this era, you know, it's pretty hard to escape the influence of like the Bowies and T-Rexes and Budgies and Sweets and some of that stuff. So it might just filter in a natural sense because you're doing hard rock based on stuff you've heard the last 10 years, whether you liked it or not. It's sort of like, you know, ingrained in you, you know. So I haven't read anything that says, hey, we were like really fucking into Sweet or something, you know. I just hear it in a couple of like melodies sometimes, you know. It's kind of
and these guys even more so. I think it's funny how similar they are to at least Di'Anno era Maiden vocally and everything. This guy's kind of the more spit and polish version of Di'Anno. Di'Anno was pretty much more hard or more punk rock.
Well, I think where it's most noticeable, and when we get into this next set of music, the closing song and the next set we're going to play is Sorcerers. And I mean, it's almost like to a T, Remember Tomorrow from Iron Maiden, except he can pull the vocal hook off, the like really epic choral vocal hook that you hear Di'Anno kind of struggle on. You know, like Remember
he struggles,
Tomorrow,
but he makes it his own.
He does, but you understand. Like when I hear Remember Tomorrow, like I think, wow, when Bruce sings this live, or like when Michael from Opeth did the cover on the Iron Maiden tribute, you know, Call of Irons or whatever, you can just tell like the song had more potential to go to like a more epic place, like kind of where Hallowed Be Thy Name or something like that went, you know, eventually for Iron Maiden. It works and it's endearing because it's Di'Anno, but you know, his inability almost like kind of adds a charm to it. But like the way that Kevin sings it on here, you know, like it shows if Di'Anno had a little bit more high range or oomph or something. This is
it kind of shows these, at least this first record. I'm going to plead ignorance that I haven't really heard a whole lot of the other Angelwood stuff, like just a little bit here and there. I'm just not
just the Loser stuff. I mean,
not super interested. But they were much more vocally driven, I guess. You know, Def Leppard could be thrown in that camp as well. That was a little bit more based on like vocal hooks and things like that.
Multi-track harmonies, they do a lot. You know, which is what Def Leppard's almost patterned on.
Yeah,
you know?
For sure.
But yeah, no, that's you know, I mean, Maiden was more. You're right, Maiden. I mean, Maiden was more of a band, whereas these guys as a power trio had to kind of just like go to their like those couple of strengths that they had, you know, like kind of weaving bass, great kind of guitar playing.
Well, and it being that, you know, you've got a guitar player / singer, that definitely affects a lot of his, you know, because you have more of just kind of like a driving rhythm that you can go back and forth and actually do the vocals and not have something, you know, like Dave Murray would be doing, like for crazy leads. So it's definitely more, I think the vocals are more kind of a part of the whole mix outside of like where Maiden was a little bit, everybody was kind of doing their own thing, but this is much more kind of harmonious and traditional in approach. I think to some degree.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess for historical purposes, you know, the record we're focusing on is self-titled Angel Witch. Angel Witch, it came out in 1980. Who actually put it out after the EMI thing fell through?
I don't think I wrote. It was like, it's some one word, like, oh Jesus,
I didn't write. Not a big deal. I couldn't.
It's not a big deal, but it's come out about 5 times reissued different
Road
versions.
Racer even put out a version in the early 90s, which became Roadrunner and stuff. But
and I think the last one came out in 2006.
Yeah, I think that's the one we have.
Well, there's a double disc that came out in 2006.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah. So
what's on that? Just some live stuff, too?
Live stuff and all the previous other crap that came out on all the other previous reissues.
Yeah. The one we have, too, has some nice BBC songs, like some BBC versions and stuff, too. So, I mean, it's a nice collection. You get a lot of bang for your buck, that's for sure, besides just the 10-song album.
$8 or something, too.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's come out on 180 gram vinyl. I'm almost positive. But.
Yeah. But the song that actually, I guess kicks off the whole record and is probably their most well-known song. It's their eponymous song, very much like Iron Maiden in a sense, is, of course, Angel Witch. And I mean, everything's just sort of working for this song. The vocal harmonies, the solos, the orgy of kind of like solos, but they're not like prog solos. They're just like punchy, really energetic, almost like proto sort of thrash stuff,
It's just, it's a lot of kind of, for lack of a better word, like guitar masturbation stuff. But that opening kind of twin lead thing that happens, and I mean, the whole song is almost a blueprint for what new wave of British heavy metal is.
Yeah. And to some extent, what like Megadeth and Metallica and some of the more, I guess, flashy thrash bands. Not so much like Anthrax or Slayer, which were kind of had their style, that was more stylized. And even to some extent, what you hear that opening like guitar riff in Angel Witch, and I mean, it's not that far from some of the stuff that say like Dark Tranquility is going to do.
Oh,
like
not
in
at all.
early
It's
records.
totally similar.
That flamboyant sort of just like going
just
right for it.
Of notes. And there's actually, I've listened to this record about 8 times today, and there's a lot of Kirk Hammett isms on the leads. You can definitely hear an influence on his playing and structuring and everything.
Well, when we get to the second track after Angel Witch, Atlantis, the guitar solo is almost like straight up a Kirk Hammett solo. Like, I mean, it's very like proto thrash. It's almost like a Metallica. You could take that like second half of that song and almost fool people it's from like Kill 'Em All or something.
Well, it's bands like this and Merciful Fate and a handful of others and Venom that really kind of made the thrash scene what it was. But it's only now that a lot of this stuff is actually being, as far as like mainstream, not mainstream appeal, as far as it's anybody can get it, anybody can check it out online. True. But I mean, I always heard the Angel Witch name dropped when I, getting into metal in the late 80s, early 90s, and the stuff was just harder than hell to find.
I think I just had like songs here and there, kind of like with like Blitzkrieg and Holocaust and just some of these other new wave British heavy metal bands were like a song.
But the stuff just wasn't something you could go to a record store and find. No. This was stuff that you tape traded or you either bought originals back in the day on,
or you found on vinyl at a used store locally sometime.
Yeah, like based on the covers and stuff like that. So I think it's only now that all this stuff is actually having some kind of widespread appreciation, as far as like you can actually trace the roots back and hear where the roots are and what they were.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Sort of the pre-internet era, a lot of people forget what life was like in that time.
Yeah, for sure.
Tracking down stuff, it was a little crazier for sure. So we'll go from Angel Witch, and then the first 3 songs really just, really the first 5 or 6 songs just are incredible. But Atlantis is the second tune we're talking about. That's the one where especially I hear some like sweet kind of like production on the vocals, but then it gets into the sort of Kirk Hammett solo we were talking about. Bass playing is excellent on Atlantis as well. Then we get kind of slow down a little bit with White Witch, which I kind of has that doomy atmosphere. It's not quite Sabbath, but there's like, I don't know, there's some...
We can hear elements of Cathedral.
Yeah, there's some clean sections in it, which kind of like allows for a nice ambience. And
I mean, the whole song's kind of based on that, Burn the White Witch vocal line that you're going to hear over and over again. That whole vocal harmony kind of drives the song.
Which Burn the White Witch is actually the name of the live CD they put out in 2009.
Okay,
there you go. Comes back full circle.
But another thing that with all these different, I know there was at least one version of this, the reissue of the self-titled that was remastered. Oh, okay. And because they were always just kind of dissatisfied with the production because it was recorded by somebody that didn't record heavy metal stuff, and they thought it kind of took a little bit of the thunder out of the music, which I really don't hear it. I mean, definitely the vocals.
So is that the part that... Do we have the remastered one? I feel like we do.
I don't know if we do or not.
I think it is.
It's got to be.
It sounds pretty full. Yeah.
But I can imagine how they could have dialed down the guitars on the original version, and the vocals would have been much more prominent, and the kind of, the backing beat and everything would be much more in the, more probably akin to like Def Leppard-ish production values that are much more
Rock Brigade, man.
Kind of, pop based than metal based.
Yep. No, that makes sense. And then we'll close out with Confused and Sorcerers after that, and we'll talk a little bit about those when we come back. But I want to throw this out: when you hear Confused, I'll talk to Mark off mic about this. I kind of hear a little Merciful Fate feel before Merciful Fate's even around, so kind of something to think about. But we got Angel Witch, Atlantis, White Witch, Confused, and Sorcerers. Enjoy.
Sorceress.
Oh, sorry.
Nobody else can see you the same way as myself. Fly high and touch the sky, you're the angel I adore. If only you could feel for me that I feel for you. Why do you ignore me, angel? Why can't I go with you? You're an angel witch. You're an angel witch. You're an angel witch. You're an angel witch. From all love I feel for you, the more you fade away. Why can't you come and love me? Do I have to stay this way? I'm gonna go insane if nothing happens soon. I look out at the night to see a shut up by the moon. You're an angel witch. You're an angel witch. You're an angel witch. You're an angel witch. You there? Why do you run away? I've never hurt you. I've never hurt you. That'd be the last thing that I do. You're an angel witch. 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 They try to harm, now it's too late, yeah. Burn the white witch. Burn the white witch.
Still life carries on.
That was Sorcerers, Confused, White Witch, Atlantis, and then we started off with the eponymous Angel Witch. And I don't know, we made mention that we talk about those last two tunes there. You know, I don't know if you had much to say about Confused or Sorcerers in some of your notes, but Confused for sure is where, like I said, I hear a kind of a thrash gallop, and then even like, I mean, there's some great harmonies in the chorus, but there's like this vibe to it that really like hinted at like the same kind of vibe you get off those first couple Merciful Fate records. Mm-hmm. You know, and I don't know.
I can hear that.
And maybe it's because Angel Witch they appear to be, I guess, along with Venom, amongst the darkest of this era of bands. You know, there wasn't really.
Well, the funny thing is, though, the subject matter is dark, but the music's pretty upbeat.
For the most
really
part,
fucking
yeah.
upbeat.
Yeah, except, like I said, for there's like a moment in Confused that like gets that like down.
Well, and there's a riff in Sorcerers that's proto Slayer.
Oh, okay.
Too.
Yeah, that's what you were saying.
I was totally hearing that. But,
yeah, and Sorcerers is the one we were.
But I
talking
guess
about before.
you know Slayer is so close to Old Priest too.
To Old Priest and Venom and some of that kind of stuff.
Especially
and
like riffing patterns and stuff like some of the old Distant Aggressor and that kind of shit from Priest is totally.
And it'd be hard to like pinpoint where each band.
Yeah, but I'm sure this band was on Slayer's radar as well.
Yeah,
I mean, especially being a band like Venom, who is so into the occult and so blatant about it too.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, where's Slayer going to go to find bands? I mean, Jesus, they have a song called "Angel of Death." I mean, not that there's no correlation.
There's absolutely no similarity whatsoever to it,
but it's still kind of a happy accident, know. So, but
theirs is also about what is it about the Nazi?
Joseph Mengele,
Slayers, and then this one's probably just about the actual thing, Angel of Death or whatever.
But Sorcerers is the tune we were mentioning in that first talk set, of course, where if you heard a little bit of Iron Maiden Remember Tomorrow, you wouldn't be that far mistaken. But there's something cool like later on in the song too, like even the solo like has a big time Thin Lizzy vibe. That's where one of the first songs I started to hear.
I mean, Hayborn's a hell of a player, and it's not just flash. Like he's got a lot of emotion going on. It's not just like like blues rock stuff that like like Led Zeppelin was throwing out or anything, but just the kind of like fury and enthusiasm, and it's just pretty unbelievable.
That
for
punk
that time.
energy, this is incredible.
And it's much different than because Maiden at the time I think was much. It didn't really have the same kind of like fire as far as solos and stuff went. As far as just like rhythm riffing and stuff, sure, but Dave Murray was always much more kind of I guess his refined. He was always doing just these kind of arpeggios and stuff a lot of the time, and it wasn't quite as like furious as Hayborn's approach.
Is it fair to say that like these guys were drawing more immediately on like kind of the loose energy of punk, whereas like Iron Maiden had the energy of punk, but they were like,
they were
also
guys.
like prog.
Yeah. They were. I mean, especially Steve Harris was always talking about Wishbone Ash and these other bands that predated him as far as all the complex riffing structures and timing and all that kind of stuff went for sure. I totally
so in a sense, like these guys were like the Slayer to like Maiden's Metallica or something.
Yeah, that's a good comparison.
So yeah, interesting. Let you guys decide on that one what you think. So. But so where we were gonna go now is kind of into the second half of the traditional 10-song Angel Witch record, with some pretty sweet songs. I know your favorite tune, or one of them.
It's one, like because everybody I'm sure is a big fan of just the self-titled song, the eponymous Angel Witch.
But I've heard it so many times. Too,
exactly, so I kind of skip over it now. And one of the other ones that's kind of popped out for me now is Freeman, which is another kind of Remember Tomorrow-ish.
Sure. Yeah, it's
really kind of like echoey, delayed,
ballady kind of tune. Yeah.
Yeah, and just the as far as how it builds too, it's not just a straight ballad, but just it's got that similar Remember Tomorrow kind of ish opener, and then when it starts to shred on the guitar, it's just like holy shit.
Yeah.
And just like it's probably one of the most like emotional solos I think on the entire record.
Absolutely. Too. I wrote here a couple things. I wrote it's an emotionally satisfying epic tune.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not trying to be a ballad like you said, but it works. There's a certain amount of like legitimate emotion that's there. Lyrically, talking about getting out of prison or whatever you want.
Yeah,
the symbolism of being a free free person, free of your soul.
Being out of a relationship, whatever it might be, yeah.
But, like I also said, too, it's like the classiest solo on the album. I kind of pin it as like a Sin After Sin, kind of Sad Wings of Destiny type of solo. Yeah. Like Here Comes the Priest, or just any of that kind of era of Judas Priest, where there was like a certain amount of like Tony Iommi classiness mixed with like the flash of twin leads. It was like a nice balance. It wasn't just like pure metallic, like, and
it wasn't pure just musicianship. It was, you could totally tell he was feeling it.
I mean, in fact, like when he starts that solo right after the kind of keyboards kind of drift in, or right when the keyboards will sort of drift in. Sorry, we're making mention as if you've heard the song, but you're about to hear this soon.
You might have heard it.
But the keyboards will sort of come in, and he does this really sort of quiet beginning, and it's similar to like some of the stuff you would hear like on an Opeth solo or a Porcupine Tree solo almost, like.
Well, there's a certain amount of November Rain, Drop to Your Knees, and, just like make love to that guitar as you're playing, too. Yeah.
But the bass, especially on Free Man, really pay attention to the bass, because I think without the bass playing on this song, it like holds that emotion together for the whole piece, really, really well. And Kevin even does some cool things with the guitar leading up to the solo. He does almost like this discordant guitar, and kind of creates ambience, and there's like some wah-wah swells that are sort of in there. It's not like overly flashy, where
it's really kind of simple and stripped down, but as far as like it just builds, beautifully throughout the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I think with the first song we're going to actually hear out of the gate, Gorgon, has some of the goofiest lyrics on the entire record.
Oh, really? I didn't pay attention to the lyrics so much.
Basically, just telling you how to sneak up on Medusa to chop her head off.
I was gonna say Gorgon is a Medusa reference. But.
Yeah, but it's very, very kind of like junior high as far as like sneak up behind her and don't look in her eyes and blah blah blah. You'll turn to stone. I mean, just like it seems like they wrote on the back of a napkin in a pub or something. But that's the one that stood out as being like the goofiest lyrics out of the
Well, we caught like other new wave bands like that before, like Witchfinder General had a couple of just like really big stinkers. What was the one about sleeping around or having a one night stand or whatever? And it was just really juvenile. Kind of a product of the times, I guess. Too much cocaine and disco and other stuff, acid floating around.
Talking about how to do acid, how to put it in tea.
But Gorgon is another one next to Sorcerers that I got a big Thin Lizzy vibe from. There's a little bit of Southern Boogie even in there, and maybe.
Oh, totally.
I don't know. Uriah Heep gets thrown around a lot, and I don't know a lot about Uriah Heep. I know of them. I know they're kind of like a poor man's Sabbath. It was kind of what they're called, or poor man's Deep Purple or whatever. But they got name dropped a lot when certain people would talk about Angel Witch and stuff. But someone also pointed out a UFO vibe on this song, which
I gotta plead ignorance on. I don't know much of anything about UFO.
I mean, I know enough about them, but it didn't jump out to me. Like when I read that, I was like, kind of odd. So maybe they're hearing something.
But you can hear a lot of, as far as just overall basic structure. I mean, there's a lot of
it's a pretty standard rock and roll song, really.
Rock and roll, but there's a lot of just the standard blues structure stuff that like the UK like Cream and stuff like that would kind of tweak a little bit to make their own, and you can hear definitely a lot of that kind of vibe, I think, to this as well.
Well, it's a cool little intro too, kind of psychedelic-y, calm before it kind of gets into the groove, the Southern Boogie groove, and then we got Sweet Danger, which kind of seems to be one of their songs that shows up re-recorded.
Well, that was their EMI single.
Yeah.
So, and this is one of that definitely has some Maiden riffs and some Deep Purple vibe.
Absolutely,
going on
big time Iron Maiden, big time. But nice.
And the weird thing is,
sing along.
I don't know where that kind of the quintessential Iron Maiden riff really came from, because these two guys are doing it at almost exactly the same time.
Yeah.
So I don't know who they're pulling it from. If it's like Atomic Rooster, Witchfinder General, or not Witchfinder General,
Wishbone Ash.
Yeah. If any of those bands were doing, because I haven't listened to that stuff in a while, but if they had any of that kind of, because Wishbone Ash had twin leads,
for sure they did,
but not that necessarily that Maiden riff, that that everybody knows as being an Iron Maiden riff, that kind of triplet thing.
Yep.
I'd love to know
hear it
etymology
on
of that thing.
Which I mean probably was recorded in like '79, because the EMI single came out in early '80. So. It's hard to know.
Maiden was doing stuff as 78, 79 as well, before some of the songs were in rotation, but I don't know if that's something that where you actually pull out, if you're actually pulling out influence from another band that's your contemporary that's not signed, that you're just playing pub gigs with.
Yeah, that's true.
So-
Because they did play a lot of gigs together, from what I've read. So
And I think one of the things that put Maiden over the top was the whole idea of the showmanship and, putting on a show and using, putting up the kabuki mask early on and just goofy stuff like that, having Eddie as the,
Sure.
as the kind of spokesperson for the band or whatever.
and it sounds like these guys didn't really sell it the right kind of way.
No, and Maiden had fantastic management right from the get-go, so.
These guys all, from the interview I was reading, all seem to be kind of like on the wrong page. Like especially the drummer, he didn't vibe with what the rest of the band were always doing sometimes, and
Yeah. And Maiden had a lot of. I mean, you have Steve Harris, who was basically kind of the the band, and but he surrounded himself with people that like with Adrian Smith, who was a little bit more of his own player. Dave Murray, who's pretty much kind of goes along with whatever.
Yeah.
And at the time, I think it was it Clive Burr on drums, or
I think Clive Burr is in there somewhere.
and
Pre-Nico.
Doug Sampson, I think was on the first record, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, that you're more the Maiden historical expert in that era. So,
But I think that the Kevin Hayburn didn't necessarily surround himself with the same type of people that understood his vision,
Yeah.
because he basically wrote everything.
sure, yeah. And there was another guy that helped contribute a little bit. He was
previous
actually
guitar player.
the fourth member of the band who didn't make it out of the recording. So, and then so we'll go from Gorgon through Sweet Danger into Free Man, and then we'll close out with two songs kind of fit together, I guess. One's an instrumental, and then one of the centerpieces definitely on the record, and one we should probably talk a little bit about in our last set, and that's the aforementioned Angel of Death, followed by Devil's Tower. So a little devil bad stuff.
Satan there for you.
Yeah. So enjoy Gorgon, Sweet Danger, Free Man, Angel of Death, Devil's Tower.
Can you hear the voice of 1,000 years ago? The laughter of Gorgon, a female that brings doom. Don't look her in the eyes, or you'll turn to stone. Don't let her deceive you. If you sense I don't look round, face this evil spirit that haunts, searching for the soul that he must take. Steve White, he rides through the realms of unknown. He is only a messenger from hell. From hell. Scanning the oceans
Devil's Tower, Angel of Death, Freeman, Sweet Danger, and we started things with Gorgon. How to attack Medusa's head.
Yeah, I'm wondering
from behind.
This was right around the same time as Clash of the Titans came out, so I wonder if that had
That was 79 or 80, I think.
I think Clash of the Titans was 1980. Ray Harryhausen's last big, foray into stop motion.
Harry Hamlin, man. Hell yeah.
Handsome man.
Yes, he was.
Burgess Meredith.
Yeah. A lot of Ursula Andrews.
And, what's his nuts? From,
Olivier?
Laurence Olivier.
Yeah.
Played Zeus.
Damn, hell of a cast.
I know.
I love that movie, so, But anyways, back to the last two tunes you heard there, which you didn't really talk a lot about. Devil's Tower, of course, is kind of just a nice closing instrumental, like a lot of cool dark atmosphere, good way to sort of close out the album. But Angel of Death before that, that's the one where I was sort of saying I hear a lot of proto kind of black metal riffing. You can almost hear like the influence that like a band like Hellhammer would take, or Celtic Frost riffs,
Yeah.
Right at the 3-minute mark, if you go back to about the 3-minute mark of that song, there's definitely a Celtic Frost riff. I mean, it's
even coming up on Hades, Paradise, and Baphomet. Some of the songs we're going to close the show out with. Definitely, as far as just some of the very kind of straightforward, chunky Celtic Frost, Hellhammer kind of riffs that would basically. The whole thing with Celtic Frost riffs is that they're riffs that anybody could. They're like quintessential riffs, every single one of the things.
But it's really like somebody else should have written them almost.
Yeah,
they're like.
But it's hard to go back and find an exact genesis of where that thing came from, like who really inspired that a little bit. So
maybe Angel Witch.
You can hear a little bit there, but I think a lot of it was Tom G. Warrior's naivete as being a young kid, but also he has a hell of a ear just for like getting that vibe of the simplest riff possible.
Yeah. And I think he probably drew a lot from Venom and some
I think so
stuff,
too. Yeah.
So, and I mean, if Venom and Angel Witch and all this stuff was sort of floating in your hands right at the same time, you start mixing that sound a little bit. I mean, like Angel of Death, what I wrote is I said, it would have been a contemporary with Venom, except they were too good of musicians,
Well, Venom also suffers from bad production. Yeah. Really bad production.
Yeah, although we haven't heard how bad the original production of this Angel Witch is, so it's hard to know.
I think it was just thin. Yeah. It was probably, set up more like a rock record, but.
Sure. And vocally, Angel of Death, some good stuff kind of in, an homage years later with some of the great vocal shrieks that Araya throws into his version of Angel of Death. Very dark, kind of evil. It's just a nice vibe, and the shredding solo is straight off of a Megadeth record. So, like, it's Dave Mustaine obviously was a big fan of these guys.
Well, I can see how the whole, because these guys are also kind of always on the short list of doom bands influence as well, and it's especially the more contemporary dooms where there's all this kind of occult-ish or like B-movie kind of vibe to the thing, but there's really not. I think the whole heavy metal vibe of these guys is not quite as in your face as like Maiden. As far as like Maiden, you wouldn't necessarily see the correlation of them being influential to a more doom band. Yeah, because I think these guys are much more like rock and roll based. What it really comes down to.
And doom is really like a derivative of rock and roll. I mean, ultimately, it's almost as less interested in metal sometimes than it is in just having a rock vibe. It's just what they do with the rock vibe, how they tune it. How slow they play it, things like that.
Yeah, rock and blues more so than, I guess, the punk element is not there.
Metal is almost like, in a sense, like the metal you're kind of talking about, the progressive-y, like well-played, intricate metal, sometimes is almost coming out of sometimes European classical music in some ways, that virtuosity.
Yeah, as far as the genesis of like the actual construction of the music and stuff.
Whereas like doom kind of comes more, like you said, from like the blues roots or something, like that sort of traditional. I mean, going back to Robert Johnson and
totally,
that's pretty much doom. Totally doom for your life. But and like even we forgot to mention another band that's like covered Angel Witch songs like Trouble. So they're a band that
I should have wrote down off the Wikipedia page all the different
Stradivarius. I was mentioning to you, which is a band you're not terribly familiar with, kind of like a contemporary of like the Finnish. Halloween, Blind Guardian, that kind of stuff.
Queensryche.
Yeah, it's kind of vocally a big Queensryche vibe and stuff. So, so they've had their roots in a lot of places, even though, as Mark was saying earlier in the show, that they didn't really get a lot of attention at the time. So,
and there's actually a couple I didn't write down exactly which riffs or out of which songs, but as far as like cathedral specific spots on cathedral songs where it'd be like a break or something is totally Angel Witch.
Oh,
like, okay, that's from that song right there.
Yeah, I could see that, especially in like the Ethereal Mirror, Carnival Bazaar kind of era where it was a little more rock and roll.
Yeah. Well, there's even one off the new record.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I could see that.
There's like a breakdowny part that it just like, oh, that sounds exactly like something off the new record.
Cool. That's cool. Well, we're going to close things here. I think probably just with a pair of tunes, just to be safe. Maybe we'll sneak Dr. Thebes in, depending on if...
just watch the Vincent Price movie.
Yeah, there you go. Much more interesting. It's an instrumental anyway, so, it's nothing you hadn't already heard in some of the solos and stuff that are on this. But it's a cool, like, Iron Maiden-y kind of solo. But the last two tunes we're going to end with are bonus tunes if you get, like, the 25th anniversary edition and some of the other stuff out there. It's Baphomet and Hades Paradise, which Mark mentioned previous. The Baphomet can be found like on one of the very first things that they ever did, which was the Metal for Mothers comp, which was Muthas, yeah, Metal for Mothers. And then Hades Paradise showed up on the Sweet Danger 12-inch. Not the 7-inch that you heard Flight 19 from earlier. At least that's from what I've read. Maybe they're the same thing, and they just got released at whatever. But
these last two, I mean, you'll definitely tell there's a big difference as far as musicianship and how complicated the songs are structured and everything as well.
I mean, Baphomet, as you said before, is one of the most. It's probably the most Sabbath song. For sure.
Where it's an obvious, okay, that's the kind of the riffing pattern of Sabbath. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to really hear. I mean, some of the soloing I can hear Iommi in, but as far as just like the rhythm tracks, I don't really hear much of it out through the rest of the record.
Yeah. And Baphomet, you mentioned Dave Murray earlier. I really hear a lot of Dave Murray type solo on this. It's less Angel Witch type solo and more like Iron Maiden, Dave Murray kind of soloing. And then Hades Paradise, just great energy. I mean, it's just like it's not like their most dynamic song because it's obviously an early kind of thing, but just kind of a cool way to sort of close things out. And again, Baphomet and Hades Paradise are not exactly like sunny topics for 1980, metal bands. Pretty taboo on some level.
Yeah, you'll hear a little Tom G. Warrior in here.
Yeah, for sure.
These guys.
For sure. But let us know what you thought. I mean, Angel Witch is one of those rare bands that's, they're one of those bands that did this almost like perfect album. Of like little acclaim.
They're the anti-Electric Wizard, where they did the best thing they ever did. Right out the gate,
and then they could never kind of capture that vibe together because, like you said, the band members kind of became disjointed and you could never kind of get that energy and stuff. So, let us know what you thought. Shoot us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com. Check us out on Facebook. Leave us comments on iTunes and star ratings and stuff. We've gotten a couple recently that were pretty nice.
Yeah, and we've got the number one way people probably find us is just like dinking around through iTunes. We've got a 5-star rating right now. I don't know if we might have like one negative review or something, but
never.
None at all. All positive. So we've never given you guys any money. So I guess that means that you like our product and we enjoy doing it. So that means a hell of a lot.
Yeah, and check us out on the website requiempodcast.com where you can become an executive producer for this show and check out some merchandise and other kind of neat things that are up there and get some stuff and stay tuned for our holiday episode coming up very soon.
Yes, and then we also have a very special episode.
It's gonna be down the road.
It's down the road a little bit, but it's all I'm gonna say is 1991.
Oh,
that's all I'm gonna say.
1991,
and it's gonna involve some interviews. It's gonna be the first fully produced episode to where it's not just gonna be me and Jason talking. Yeah. We're actually gonna have guests, and these are notable musicians too.
Sure.
So
we're kind of
and journalists
maybe looking at it as episode number 150, kind of. It's, in comic terms, number 150 sometimes got you an embossed cover, sometimes got you chromium.
This is going to be way better than anything on Jim Lee.
But this is going to be not only chromium and embossed, but you're going to get a Topps trading card in a bag, poly bag. So it's that kind of level. But just let us know what you thought, and hopefully you enjoyed some Angel Witch. So we're going to close things out with Baphomet and Hades Paradise. And I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.
Enjoy.
Running away, don't understand. Their